You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast, a production of the Vint Marketplace. As always, I'm joined by Billy Galanko, who is sheltered in place in LA. And actually, I can't believe we haven't talked about the fires in LA so far on the podcast. I feel like we're a couple weeks late to that. But where are you situated? I actually just have no idea where you're situated relative to that.
Yeah, you're actually really far behind. We actually got rain over the weekend, so everything is in much better shape. I was right in the middle of the two main fires, equidistant, so luckily wasn't close to any flames. But we had lots of smoke coming from both ways and ash falling around the house, so we wore masks outside for a while. But luckily we're fine. But yeah, there are definitely tons of places that are completely wiped out, so it's still rippling through the greater LA community now. But related to the podcast, I guess on a lighter note, not to get too heavy, but still impacted on a wine side, I'm interested to see how some of the vineyards, especially that Brady works with, Byron Brady, are doing, because I think a lot of those were in some of those areas that were pretty heavily impacted as well. So
100%, because I remember when we talked about LA County wines on some previous episodes, and I was talking about how I just had got accustomed to some of the geography, like just thinking about LA as it's situated in LA County more broadly. And when I'm looking at the map on TV, I'm like, wait, that's where all the wine is. Yeah, I'm sure there's a ton of loss on the wine agriculture side.
Yeah, obviously people in their property are priority number one, but it will be interesting to see over time how those were impacted. Vineyards tend to be pretty good at avoiding fire because they're like a fire break. And with, hopefully there weren't many leaves on there. There might actually have been some leaves left. So hopefully they were unimpacted, but we shall see how it works out over time.
Do you have some articles to dig into in our news portion?
Yeah, I have some articles, and over the weekend I actually taught a class with Fine Vintage, one of the first classes of 2025 that I'll be teaching. And that was pretty cool this week, WSET 1 class. So I had hopefully some of the folks, I plug the podcast, so hopefully some of them are now listening. But that was pretty fun because you get to taste through wines, kind of prime examples from around the world. And it's always interesting to see the questions that you get along the way, and also the crowd of people that are looking to learn. We had a lot of people who had WSET classes as a gift, I'd like to get, what do you think about that? If somebody gave you, say you weren't working for Vint and you liked wine as much as you do, would you like a WSET 1 or 2 class as a gift, or what would?
Yeah, I think WSET 1 or 2, those are excellent gifts. When you get into 3 and beyond, it starts to become like, okay, do you want to actually study this or not? But 1 and 2, I think, are really, if someone in your life is a wine drinker and enthusiast, and if you see them as, this person really knows a lot about wine, they'd probably appreciate 1 or 2.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I had never really thought about it as a gift. And everybody, I had like, how many was it, like 4 or 5 people and this was a smaller class, only like 9 folks, and like almost half were gift folks. So
that's a generous gift too.
Yeah, this class is over $500. We one thing I think is a good value though is like the wine that you get to drink. Like our budget for wine is more than what the ticket price is to get in.
Yeah.
So I think if you don't know, having a certified sommelier and whatever, my WSET diploma person explaining to you more money than what you would have to spend on bottles, I think it's worth it, because then even if you bought those same bottles, you'd have to be self-taught on how to appreciate them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know that you can get like gift cards and I guess partial credits towards courses and stuff too. So that is a good gift idea.
Yeah. Shout out Fine Vintage. We're actually going to have James Kluwer, Master of Wine, who is the founder of Fine Vintage, on the podcast here in the coming weeks. So you guys can hear more about those classes firsthand. But yes, moving on to the news this week, we actually have another future guest who will be coming up in the next weeks, maybe in a month as well, in terms of releases. There's an article by Sarah Heller, MW, that's featured in last week's news on the Vint Marketplace. And it is in Club Winologique. I can never say it quite right. But it's called A Trend to Blend. It's basically talking about how the art of blending is coming back into vogue, or how people are trying to champion it, balanced next to the idea of single vineyard, site expression driven wines, because that has been very much the craze in the first 20 years of this millennium. So I'd like to get your thoughts here. Are you seeing this? And I have some thoughts on how great blends can be. So you shouldn't have just site specific wines and not just blends. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So are we talking about this as a trend in like the retail and down market sort of sector, like $10 to $35? Because I just don't really know how more premium producers, how their marketing is affected by single vineyard versus blends, the way that maybe other single are. Do you have an idea?
Yeah, no, there are examples from Paolo Scavino, whose Barolo we sell on the marketplace, which is, I think his stuff's over $100 a bottle. There's some champagnes referenced. I think it's more not necessarily that they're a lower price point. It's more that they're talking about blends. It's maybe something they've been doing, and it's like more of a promotional thing now, rather than just doing it and then marketing it as like a high quality wine by itself and not noting it's a blend.
Yeah. Okay. So you mean this is a trend of talking about the fact that the wine is a blend as like a tool in the marketing toolkit, versus just what it is? Because in the past, maybe sometimes it would be avoided that it's a blend, right? That wouldn't be like front and center focus on
exactly.
The label.
Like if you think about from the 80s through the early 2000s, it went from here's wines with the name of a place, probably a French place, and in the 80s and 90s, like everybody started putting variety, especially from New World wines, on the label. And then the idea of just like, quote unquote red blend, just labeled red blend, came into kind of vogue, or at least it was cheap and affordable. And then now everything's about, this is a wine of this as small parcel as possible, single vineyard, single block, all of that. So people moved away from talking about blends, and now they're just moving back.
People even do say, it's like, what kind of wine do you like? And they say, I like red blends, which maybe the most means nothing comment that you could make with regard to what kind of wine do you like. Even just saying red or white would be maybe more clear than saying red blends to me. I don't know. Maybe that's wrong. But yeah, totally get it. I think that's cool. Maybe puts emphasis on the winemaker, puts emphasis on the process a little bit more, which is interesting because I think typically we talked about, like you said, single vineyard, you're putting the emphasis on the place and the vineyard and the fruit. But it seems, when you start talking about blending and emphasizing that, which could be interesting in the age of celebrity winemakers and online personalities and even producers gaining a following, I could definitely see that like someone gets hooked on a producer and they get to recognize and know the name of the winemaker and get excited by the thought of, oh, this person blended this wine in this way. I can definitely see how that could be a movement in terms of positioning.
Yeah. And I think you've already seen that a little bit in Napa. People follow some celebrity winemakers. Yeah. So I think the idea that you're not drinking blended wine is pretty rare. If you have a single vineyard wine from like a Grand Cru in Burgundy, sure. But even within that, there's going to be blocks that taste different. And it's up to the winemaker to blend those to create a certain profile. But there are producers around the world. Think of the top chateau in Bordeaux that are always blends. Bartolo Mascarello, who is one of the most famous Barolo producers in the world, it's always a blend. And traditionally, Barolo was always a blend of different Cru. So I think it's just interesting now that they're starting to talk about it a little bit more. Another example is champagne is almost always a blend from many different sites.
Or even blending red and white together, like in the Rhone.
Like in Côte Rôtie,
Côte Viognier. I also think about, I'd much rather have a producer, I'm just thinking like stateside California producer, who wants their cab to be more like inky black, and so they add some Syrah versus adding some weird additive. Or that's just could be one way to think about. Yeah, like I'd rather them do that if they're trying to go for a certain look or style or feel or whatever of their wine and aren't trying to assault the fruit by adding a chemical.
Yeah, I will say that was actually funny when I was doing some studies today for my MW prep, one of the notes the guy said is like red blends tend to be darker than single variety wines. And I think part of that is you are looking for some color occasionally. Red grapes are all just different colors. But I agree with that. I would rather that be blended, but I would also just want a perfectly balanced wine. Like if the winemaker has the ability to create something that's like, this wine is slightly out of balance, whether it be too much acid, too much tannin, and they have the blendability there and they know how to do it, it just comes out as a better wine. So it's literally, would you rather drink a better wine or would you rather just say, this wine is from that exact place? But however, in this vintage, the acid was screaming or like the right side of the vineyard got sunburned and now it's not great.
Yeah, you take all the fruit that you have available to you during the season and you survey it and you say, okay, what's the best wine that we can make from this fruit? I think that I'd much rather a producer do that than say, okay, can I make a 7 out of 10 wine from this block over here? Because that's the block I'm working with. I'd much rather them have all the tools at their disposal. And obviously every now and then, like when you think a lot of the top wine from a producer, usually they'll set aside the best fruit. And yeah, maybe that's a single vineyard or something, and they label it and bottle it that way. That's cool. But by and large, use everything that's at your disposal, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know if I've articulated it well enough, but I mean, even in some of those chateaux, like in Bordeaux in their cab blocks, they now ferment parcel by parcel because each one does express a little differently. So there's always some element of blending, even if it's all the same grape from the same vineyard. So I just think people should keep
that's
that in
a great
mind.
point. You might have a vineyard you might have a couple 100 feet of elevation swing in the same vineyard. And you can say, oh, it's from this vineyard, but the fruit's really like probably not that similar top to bottom of that block. Yeah. So I think when you say, oh, blending, it's really just owing to intentionality behind it because every wine at the end of the day is some sort of blend, unless it's off the juice from off the literal same like 3x3 yard space on the vine.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people just have some aversion to that word red blend based on the reputation it got. So just blend. It's cool that it's coming back and people are recognizing it can be equated with quality.
The apothic wines did that, right? I guess that was probably the really big. I remember they would always have red blend in like big red letters on black paper on their wines.
You name it, whatever commercially produced large scale wine that you probably find at 7-Eleven, almost all of those are probably labeled red blend.
Yep.
Cool. Moving on to somebody who doesn't drink red, he probably drinks red blends. I was going to say apothic.
Doesn't drink apothic.
Yeah, unless he's studying for exams, which I don't know if on MS exams, CMS exams, they put as wide of a range of quality as they do on the Master of Wine program. But we have Tony Gullikson today. He's an advanced sommelier, just came in second in the Best Sommeliers in America competition with Guild Somm, and is the general manager of the Fitzroy in Savannah.
Yeah, Tony works for Southern Cross Hospitality down there in Georgia, and works with, I think, a couple of their different properties, but is the general manager at the Fitzroy, and yeah, gave us, I think, some pretty cool behind the scenes on what it's like running a program in the South, a wine program in the South, Savannah, Georgia, a place where you might want to associate a little bit more with cocktails, maybe, but the Fitzroy is an Australian pub themed style restaurant. I think they've got like some Australian influence in their food there. So he's been able to put together a really cool wine and drinks program there. And it was a lot of fun to hear from him. Someone not tending the program on one of the coasts, right? Not New York, not LA, San Francisco, Chicago, maybe. You can throw that in there, Midwest. But someone who's elevated their craft in a sort of unknown place.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Savannah, people do come and go to the beach, so I would count it as a coast. But
oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. It is on the coast. I'm thinking like, what am I thinking? Oh, dead center of Georgia. But that is not where Savannah is.
Continue. Or the place where the people say they're like the coastal hubs of, I don't want to use the term coastal elites, but people do say that.
When you say coastal elites, you're not thinking about Savannah, Georgia. So I read my case.
I ate there. That's part of where I actually met Tony, but it's definitely a cool gastropub with a really neat wine list. And yeah, to Brady's point, we've had people on the podcast working hospitality and like wine meccas, but we haven't had anybody kind of working wine in a really high level outside of that area. And I thought it was really cool to talk to somebody from the Southeast because I grew up in the Southeast, or I did. And I know the struggle when I go back home of trying to find an interesting wine program. I know Savannah is much more of a culinary destination than where I grew up. People are looking down there more for like bourbons. Maybe they are drinking some wine. It's more generic. Nobody's really seeking out a really international portfolio necessarily. So the fact that he's able to bring that and then also sell it and move wines with like varieties as obscure as Rot Giffler. I had one of those while I was there. He had a really unique Spanish wine from Rioja where he blended in, it's a wine where they blend in some sherry from down south, which is like an expression of Rioja whites that I'd never had before. So I think it's really interesting to hear his perspective on how this program was built, what they need to have, what he's trying to bring in to introduce folks to.
Yeah, some other notes from the conversation was just remarking about how competitive the pricing was, both on the by the glass and also the by the bottle stuff that he was able to source for the program. So I just thought that was really great that he's bringing in such cool wines with so much diversity and also just offering them at extremely accessible prices for a restaurant. So it was cool to hear a little bit about the industry and the way that wines move between wholesalers and distributors and the restaurants down there as well, because it's a little bit different than maybe we've talked about in other times on the podcast. So.
Yeah. Yep. That they also offer half bottles. They Corbin you a half bottle, which I thought was great. I wasn't actually going to get any of the interesting wine until the server told me that. And then I was like, all right, cool. I'm in. The other part of the realm of wine that we haven't really touched on before that Tony was able to offer us insight to was the competition side of things. I've always been curious as to what these competitions entail, and he gave us really interesting insight onto kind of the types of things that you're asked, the different levels, the types of, how would we even say this? The different things that you're asked and how hardcore it can be, the level of detail at which people get into and how you work your way through a quote unquote wine competition circuit, which I didn't really know existed at all.
Yeah, service, wine knowledge, and so deep on service of, I think, not just wine, but basically every beverage that you might have in a restaurant, high level of knowledge on all of those things, how to serve tea, how to understand and serve beer as well. I assume the advanced is like that because I know the MS is that way. So yeah, really deep knowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really interesting. I hope everybody enjoys hearing from him. I think it's really cool juxtaposition of a younger sommelier on his way up in the wine journey to compare to somebody like Bobby Stuckey and Raj, who may be at the top of their game, or Raj has even left the service floor. And it's pretty cool to talk to people from all sides of the spectrum. So I hope you guys all enjoy.
Yep. And before we get to our podcast, remember, go and check out our wine and spirits retail store. It's at vintmarketplace.com. You can find wines from all around the world, probably some of the wines that we have talked about on the podcast before. And we also have one of the largest selections in the U.S., the most competitive pricing for enthusiasts and collectors alike. The Vint Marketplace is your go-to shop for stocking your wine cellar. So without further ado, here's our interview with Tony Gullikson.
Hi, Tony. Thanks so much for joining today.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Billy.
Yeah, no, this is a kind of a whirlwind podcast relationship. I actually just met you not too long ago when I was down in Savannah with my mom and my brother. And it was really great. You served us some really interesting wines. I don't know if you remember the exact wines, but I wouldn't mind even just talking about them. It's rare to see a Rot Giffler on any menu, much less in the South. And then you also showed me a really cool wine from the south of Spain as well. That was really cool. So I was inspired to ask Tony if you wanted to come on the podcast. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to give a little bit of background about yourself and what you're doing right now? And then we can hop into building a program. I think when we're talking about building a program, we can talk about the specific wines you shared, because I think there's sections where we can talk about how you're getting people to try these interesting wines.
Yeah, totally. So my name's Tony Gullikson. I'm an advanced sommelier and also spent a lot of time this last year competing as well and have potentially some more competitions coming up in the future. I'm originally from Sonoma, California, which is where I grew up. And for the longest time, I really wasn't interested in wine at all until I think, like many people, you find hospitality was a stepping stone for me. I went to school for theater and was planning to be an actor. And then during that time, realized that oh, I actually really like doing this. And once I realized this is where I was going to be, then I decided to specialize in something. And so I think where I grew up just came flushing back to me and made me really start enjoying and appreciating wine. So that's what I decided to specialize in. I'm currently based out of Savannah, Georgia, at a little gastropub called the Fitzroy, and trying to build a really cool but affordable program for like a gastropub style, but like an elevated gastropub.
Nice. Yeah. When we've talked to folks in the past who've made different transitions from careers into wine, did you, when you realized that you liked hospitality and wanted to stay in that world, was that sort of a decision where you were thinking into the future and were choosing sort of a lifestyle career, or did you just pick a niche and go for it? What was the decision making process there? And do you build your life around your work in the restaurant?
I think it was a little bit more the former, where I knew at one point if I was going to have a family at some point, probably being in the restaurant till midnight wasn't going to be good. So it was two things. I wanted to have something that when my career in restaurants was over, I'd be able to transition into another avenue that was related, like distribution or importing, something like that. But then in the meantime as well, I think having a lens to give great hospitality makes the job more enjoyable for me. And so once I realized, I was like, okay, hospitality, really enjoying it, was transforming me as a person, and I really loved it. I was like, how can I do it the best for what can I focus on that's going to make it, great for everybody and make it more enjoyable for myself?
Yeah, I mean, who did we talk? Or I know who we talked to. I was thinking, when did we talk to? We talked to Bobby Stuckey last year, I believe, early last year on our podcast. And when I think of someone who works the floor, works beverage programs, those kinds of things, yeah, I think of those long nights and hours. Yeah, that's interesting that you thought ahead of time about ways that you could specialize in a niche, but also take that experience and build a life maybe that's more sustainable, like you said, when you have a family or those kinds of things. That's cool that you've been thinking about that already. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about your day-to-day right now and your role, what that looks like at the property that you're in charge of, and then maybe what your other roles are within the hospitality group.
Sure. I think, and this is probably a good transition to start talking about what it's like to do beverage in the South, especially in a small town like Savannah. There's only probably 2 or 3 restaurants in all of Savannah that have a dedicated sommelier. And if you want to work in beverage in this area, you have to wear multiple hats. So my official role at the restaurant where I'm at is general manager. So I oversee all aspects of the business, which is not necessarily something that I wanted to do. I'd love to spend my whole time doing beverage, but it's actually been really great. I've had to grow and learn new skills, and I think overall it's made me in ways a better beverage professional because I'm thinking about other things. I'm not just getting a budget from a beverage director and purchasing off of that. I'm keeping in mind like all the labor and all the purchasing and budgets and trying to fit what I have to temper myself. And so that's been it's been good for me, where if I was just in a role where I had free reign to do whatever I want, I probably would buy a bunch of stuff that I didn't need to buy. But as the general manager and seeing the financials and having to justify everything when it all rests on me, it's been really good to expand those skills. So to answer your question, I'm the general manager. Yeah. But I try to really have tried to focus on beverage.
Nice. I did have one question. How did you end up in Savannah of all places? Were you going to SCAD to pursue your acting ambitions, or like how did you end up there?
So my dad, grew up in Sonoma. My parents got divorced when I was 12 or something like that. And then when I was around 20, my dad moved to Savannah. And so before I was here was so the company I'm at right now, Southern Cross, and specifically the restaurant, the Fitzroy. Prior to there, I was when I left hospitality, and I was actually building pools. So I was a project manager for a pool construction company in Nashville, Tennessee. And when I was there was when I realized, I was like, actually, you know what? I think I really like being in hospitality. Came down to Savannah, and first place I applied as a bartender at the Fitzroy, and got the job. And so that was in October of 2021. I've took a couple leaves, like when I went to California, when I was preparing for Advanced, But that's how I end up in Savannah. My dad essentially lives here.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
I want to, I guess there's two topics I really want to dive into, but I think just knowing that your background, you had a little break there. How about we talk about how you ended up passing the advanced and talking a little bit more about what the advanced sommelier exam is and how much harder it is than just the certified? Because we've had a few master sommeliers on, but I don't think people really grasp how intense the advanced is. So I think, you want to just talk through that a little bit first and how you prepped for it?
Sure. And I have a lot to say about advanced. So I went pretty hard up until passing advanced. I actually passed intro in 2022. So from March of 2022 is when I passed intro to July of 2024 is the time it took for me to pass advanced. But I basically just dedicated my whole life to preparing for that exam. And I was like, I'm gonna take a shot at this. We'll see. Maybe I'll fizzle out. I'm definitely gonna go for certified. Definitely want that. And then once I passed that, I was like, all audible. Do I want to go for advanced? Do I not? Preparing for advanced. So there's just so much to cover. You have to, and you also have to be you have to have everything all together at the same time as well, because two parts of the exam, tasting and service, happen on the same day. It used to actually be harder. I had an MS that I was tasting with the other day, and he was like, advanced to me was harder than masters because you had to have everything on the exact same day.
And you had to pass it all at the same time, right?
And you had to pass everything at the same time. So I don't know. When you ask preparing for advanced and just how much harder it is, it's hard to even say exactly. Wine, I think at that point really has to just become a part of you, to where you have to be able to answer questions that are not certified. They'll ask you, what's Krug's single vineyard in the Côte de Blancs? Stuff like that, where it's just like facts. Whereas at advanced, I think you were getting more questions that relied on your overall knowledge of wine and how that falls into service. And at the same time being hit with questions like, oh, who's the winemaker at Ridge for this vintage? So it's a mix of like holistic learning, and also you have to know a tremendous amount of, I don't want to say trivia, but little tiny facts.
Yeah. I was just gonna say the minutia is what really stood out to me when I'm in my tasting group with people going for their advanced, or your friend Max Goldberg going for his MS. Just the amount of small details about each region and wine is incredible.
Right. Yeah. How do you think having your time spent with Max and Master Sommeliers, how do you think it's different than diploma?
The diploma side is broken up into those 6 pieces. So for a while you can be dedicated to sparkling, or you can be dedicated to fortified. And even on the exam, it's more training you towards the MW way of thinking. It's more about process and understanding kind of these macro forces that go into, number one, making the wine, from the viticulture all the way through the winemaking, but also the commercial side of things. And you always have that lens of how are we going to sell this at the end? So I think they keep it a little higher level there. Again, like that was my biggest beef with the diploma, is you still have non-wine professionals taking it. And in theory, if you focus enough, you can pass. Whereas I don't think any non-wine professional could pass the advanced, and now it's the same with the MW.
Yeah. I think the thing that's tough about advanced is really the structure of it, is that you have to travel to another city. It's once a year, and there's not coursework for it. So really you have to rely on your network. And I think the court sets it up in that way that you really should be building a network as you're pursuing these exams. And that's because the whole thing, like their whole mission is elevating hospitality through the lens of beverage. And I think if it's not a team effort, then it becomes really, I don't know. It's hard. I don't know what the right word is, but it becomes like just you in front of a book and all the knowledge that you have. But if it's not being shared with others and the whole industry isn't being lifted, then I don't think they're fulfilling their mission. And so that would be my advice to anybody, is to really network and learn from other people, their experience with the exam.
Yeah, to know who made the wine at Lytton Springs in 2014 is, you have to be interested in wine in your day to day. Sure. You're not going to just read that in a magazine accidentally sometime. I just want to make a comment about, while you guys were chatting advanced stuff, I pulled up the beverage list, or at least the short version of the beverage list at Fitzroy, where you're working, the thing that stood out to me right away was how good the pricing was.
Yeah.
On your bottle pricing, super fair, which is, yeah, I think that's really cool, especially given that it sounds like you're bringing in some interesting stuff.
Yeah. At Fitzroy, the goal for that program, and definitely the buy the bottle, is balanced out by really great cost of goods sold on the buy the glass program. We're able to kind of like run higher COGS on the bottles because we have really great COGS on the buy the glass. But yeah, the whole point of that program specifically was to put really classic wines in front of people. We may not have the best bottling from the best producer, but we definitely will shoot for like their entry level. So like our Chianti Classico is a Sole Elena, really great producer. Not their top bottling, but it's a great window into what the world of classic wines are. So a great place to work, I think, if you're trying to pass exams too.
Yeah.
I have a question about the sparkling wines. How do you decide what to put on a by the glass menu when it comes to sparkling? What goes into that?
For sparkling, I go off of what people ask for. Like in Savannah, we have, Savannah's not on the cutting edge. I think if you wanted to talk about maybe the South in general, but specifically Savannah, because we don't have a Four Seasons or we don't have a Ritz-Carlton down here that's saying, oh, this is what's current right now, and then those people are feeding out. So really the trends here are from, I would say, a decade ago. And we used to not have Prosecco by the glass on our program, but people asked for it. And I am, at the same time, I'm putting on like the general manager cap. Maybe I wouldn't want Prosecco. Maybe I would try to look for something more neat like Fiore Arancio or something like that. But people like Prosecco. So that's how I made the decision there. But we honestly, recently, at least in the South, we have not been selling a lot of sparkling wine.
Yeah, I would. So let's talk a little bit about your type of clientele and how maybe since you've lived in Sonoma and you've been out there, how you think maybe that impacts what you're picking, and then how you sell some of these more obscure things. Because from my little time in Savannah, I went on a couple of these little tours and they were telling us about how many like bachelorette parties and things there were. And I saw a lot of these very old folks walking around and looking at history tours. So you have this dichotomy of really young people maybe looking to party, older people who maybe are very traditional, and then somehow like I like fit in the middle. How do you try to craft something that caters to these people? And then how much is it you wanting to lead them somewhere versus having what they want?
So what's really interesting about Savannah too is we get two completely different clienteles based on the season. In the summer, we get a lot of families who are going to the beach who are certainly not buying the most expensive wine on the list. And then in the winter, we actually get a lot of people from New York as well. New York and the Northeast who are coming down for their winter home where it's not particularly cold. Even though right now I'm looking out the window and we actually have snow in Savannah. It's the first time in 7 years. It's 30 degrees outside. So whatever, the New York people are like, what are we doing down here right now? But as far as picking wines for the program, I try to run, for me, at least at Fitzroy, I'm really trying to pick things that are classic. And I don't think what I'm doing here now, I'm really not trying to push the boundaries. Really, what I'm trying to do is just establish a great list with really classic expressions of varietals. If somebody's coming in, it's not really my goal at Fitzroy right now to introduce them to something new and unique. I do have things like that on the list for people who come back, like the Rotgifler. But if I'm picking Rotgifler, like I'm going to pick a really classic producer like Stadelman, who's, I think, probably the best Rotgifler producer. So I'm trying to really just put wines that are very much like straight down the middle of the road, like fastballs, but really good expressions of those things.
So when you're doing that, so I guess, and you explained it to me a little bit when we met, but how do you sell something like a Rotgifler to someone? Like you explained a little bit. So you talk about how the wine is itself. I also noticed you had an orange from Clemensbusch, and then you also showed me the right. Spanish wine. We can talk about that a bit. That had maybe a little bit of sherry blended in. These are certainly curvy fastballs, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. I understand those wines though. So I'll tell you, I don't know if I'm saying the wrong thing or not, but those wines were all things that I pulled off of closeout lists as well. And so I got a tremendous deal on them. And so I'm willing to take a little bit more of a risk to fill out the edges of the list, but I'm certainly not going to be buying a $40 Rotgipfler because I want to put that in front of somebody for $55. And if they're willing to take a little bit of a risk, I think they're going to get a really cool wine. And that wine I love. I'm unfortunately down to 2 bottles now, but I want to reward the risk, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'll have things like that Clemens Bush orange wine, again, like another classic producer, not a particularly like classic style for Riesling from the Mosel is to do orange wine. But if somebody comes in and wants to try orange wine, I want to put something in front of them that's from a great producer who knows what they're doing and give them a really good example of orange wine, even if it's coming from the Mosel.
Yeah. Now I'll let Brady hop in here, but I think contrary to what you were saying, it's not the wrong thing. I think that's the right thing is when a wine program or restaurant actually has a wine professional or a sommelier who can identify these gems that are a great value to potential customers, rather than somebody, and it's happening more and more even here in LA, where they just have somebody who like loosely knows wine and they just pick off a list from a distributor that's basically just like right down the middle and they can't choose anything. So I think that's spot on. It shows the value you're adding to the program. Plus you do the really cool thing with the half bottles, which you offer as well, which I think is amazing.
Yep. Yeah. Half bottles on anything off the list pretty much, unless it's a screw cap.
Oh, very cool. Do you find that you have to do educate your staff to do a lot of, I was going to say selling, but obviously if you're putting a selection of interesting wines on a menu, maybe especially in a place like the South, do you have to do a lot of education selling at the table to be able to get people to try unique new things that they might not be notice the name of?
A little bit. Yeah. Like when we do, so every day there's usually by the glass specials. So when Billy was there, we were specialing Rioja Blanco, but a really traditional style of Rioja Blanco where they blend in Manzanilla sherry. And so already like in the span of that sentence is, okay, how do you deal with Viura? How do you deal with Rioja Blanco? How do you deal with Manzanilla? So there's all these factors to incorporate. And so when we do BTGs that are more interesting, then definitely I'll do more training on it. But I think the biggest training for my staff is like really how to just sell them on the wine program and really how to get me to the table. And then once I'm at the table, maybe we end up with a glass of a BTG Cabernet Sauvignon, or maybe they go for something a little more unique. And so that's really the sales side of it for my front of house staff, is getting me over to the table is what I try to teach them to do.
And so is the biggest level of interest from clients come in, is it beer? Is it cocktails? I would assume maybe cocktails is pretty high on the list.
Yeah, at Fitzroy, it's definitely cocktails and bourbon. We have a pretty strong bourbon program too.
Nice. Yeah, we're actually going down there for a family drive. I have some family on my wife's side in Georgia, and so we're going to be stopping through in Savannah in like late April, early May. So I have to stop in and see you.
Yeah, definitely. We'll pull some stuff and set it aside.
Yeah, Brady will be racking your brain. He's also a bourbon aficionado, so you
cool.
might have to. He can be the judge of the quality of your list. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I wanted to pivot a little bit briefly to talking about sommelier competitions. So we've said before, we've had a few folks who run programs, not in the South though, but we haven't had really anybody who competes. We've actually had people who like judge some of these, but how do sommelier competitions work? And then I guess what I always wonder is, are you scoring points based on things you're noting, or is it something else that's a little more subjective?
So the competitions that I've done, so I did the Guild Somm Wine Champs competition, which is just a theory competition. And then I did the Best USA Sommelier Competition, which is like a feeder competition for the ASI Best Somm of the Americas and Best Somm of the World competition. And then just recently I did Somm Olympics in Atlanta. They all function, they're actually all very different. As I said, the Guild Somm Wine Champs is just theory-based. The Somm Olympics in Atlanta is a unique format where there's 3 parts to it. There's tasting, there's service, and there's theory. But you have to have a team of 3, and each person takes an individual event. And then it's your combined score for all of that. But then the most, I think, classic Somm competition, and like when people talk about sommelier competitions, is things that are in the ASI format. And the ASI is the Association Sommelier International. which I'm assuming they're based out of France, but it's pretty much a European group. And that one really, it takes everything. There's theory, there's tasting, and there's a service component as well. So it very much mimics the advanced or the master sommelier format to it. And that was actually the reason why I started to do it. I was listening to the Guild Som podcast, and Mark Gillidew was on it, and he was talking about his experience in competitions and how it prepared him for exams. And I remember when I was listening to it, and he was saying, especially with the ASI, you have to compete in a foreign language. And I was listening to it, I was like, oh, that would be great. I am never, ever, ever going to do that. I took 2 years of Spanish when I was in high school. And so I was like, there's no way that I could ever do this competition. And so just to dovetail into the anecdote, I signed up for it because there was 3 rounds, right? So first round for the best Somm of the USA is just theory. I got through theory. And so I was like, great, this is before I took advanced. And so for round 2, they send you a kit of 6 wines through Master the World. And so I was like, this is awesome. Like, I've already accomplished what I got. I'm going to get the opportunity to grid 6 wines on time in front of a master sommelier and get some feedback. So I was like, this is wonderful. Like, I already got what I wanted out of it, and I don't have to learn Spanish. I did well in the semifinals. And so then I made it to like the final 5, and I was like, okay, so now I have to, and I was like, well, am I going to do this? Am I not going to do this? And I was like, let me just see what I can do. And so started working on that, and got second place of all things. So I actually went from I'll never do this competition to placing really well in it, which was fun and surreal and all those things. Did I answer your question? I know I dovetailed.
Well, a little bit. So
Yeah.
first we can finish.
How they work.
How they work. What are you asked the same types of questions? How is the tasting judged?
Yeah.
That type of stuff.
Okay. So I didn't do tasting at Somm Olympics. My good friend Ashley, who's in South Carolina, she did. And for them, though, it was a similar thing. 4 wines. The structure for Somm Olympics, there was just specific information that you needed. It wasn't so much subjective. They wanted to know variety. They wanted to know region. They wanted to know vintage. All the thing. Actually, Somm Olympics was very much objective. At the best Somm of the USA, it was 6 wines. It was written. And it was pretty much, I don't know how much they took into account like your quality of fruit, if you're calling tart versus ripe or something like that. I don't know if they were deducting points. I'm assuming they're all pretty much based on objective factors, like what's the variety, and if you're calling a variety that it's not, do the structure calls make sense for the variety that you called? That's how I think they work as far as that goes. As far as the theory at the best USA Somm preliminaries and the semifinals, I thought was very fair. The theory at the finals was insanely hard. It was like questions about stuff that I had never even heard before. And I think theory is probably one of my strongest suits. So like when I was getting questions about mountain ranges in India and things like that, I was like, okay, I'm so far out of my comfort zone here. But I think they do it on purpose like that. They're not expecting people to score. You don't have to, because you don't have to score whatever 60 to win. Like at advanced, you got to get 60% to make it to tasting and service. They just want to see, if we throw out the hardest questions possible, who's going to rise to the top, who really has that depth of knowledge.
Is it for you, what do the competitions serve in terms of, is it like a litmus test for you in terms of understanding where you're at with your education? Is it just something fun that you like to do? Where do you feel like it fits into your longer term plan in the industry?
I think for me, and really like the main competition this year was the best USA Somm competition. That one for me was very much just for the preparation for advanced. I wanted the opportunity to just throw any theory at me. Let me see how I'm ranking up or how I'm doing. And yeah, for me, it was very much in preparation for the actual exams. But now it's turned into this whole thing where I'm like in the throes of competition. And I saw everybody who was at the best USA Somm finals was at the Somm Olympics finals or Somm Olympics. So now it's like a community, and now I'm really enjoying it and envisioning what can competitions mean. Obviously, doing well at ASI Worlds would be amazing. And so that's why I'm actually taking off 2025. I could sit for Masters this year. I got accepted, but I'm not going to sit this year. I'm going to prepare because since I got second at the USA competition, if Mark Gilladue, who beat me, our team did beat Mark at Somm Olympics though, so that was nice. But anyway, if he wins at the Americas competition, then I get a seat at the best Somm of the world competition. And if that's going to happen, my Spanish is going to have to get a lot better. And so I set this year aside just in case I have to do competitions. And I pushed really hard for advanced, and I'm just a little bit burnt out. So yeah, but ultimately they started with trying to prepare for exams, and now it's become its own monster in a way.
Yeah, it's a pressure cooker sort of situation too, right? Like you have to exercise your knowledge in a high stress type environment.
Yeah. And it's just good to see kind of how you handle the pressure and everything. I grew up playing sports, and so for me, I felt very much at home at competitions. But yeah, for me, I just never thought of myself as like a competitive somm. And I think in hospitality, that's not really how I feel about it. Obviously, I want like my restaurant to be successful, and I want people to be like, oh yeah, go to Fitzroy if you want wine and things like that. But I never really saw the two things like coalescing, like how much I like competition and how much I like wine.
One part we didn't really discuss in the competitions was the service. How is that? Yeah, I guess scored. Because to me, like theory makes sense, yes or no, or did you answer the question? And then wine can be objective, but were they giving you hard scenarios like they do in the movie Somm, where they're like, cool down this bottle of champagne in 20 minutes, or what type of thing was it?
They were pretty. Somm Olympics, I took service in Somm Olympics, and it was pretty straightforward. There was a champagne table and there was a decanting red wine table. They threw some kind of crazy scenarios at me. I think at Somm Olympics, my scenario was that the guest of honor at the sparkling wine table had just supplied the evidence to catch this serial killer in Atlanta, which I think was like a reference to some local, not actually real, but like some local joke. And so I think it was like that test was really just like keeping composure and not being wild. I've heard similar situations at advanced exams where they say, oh, I found this bottle of Grange at the bottom of the Great Barrier Reef when I was scuba diving. And like, how do you handle like you don't laugh at the guest kind of situation. So there was a little bit of that. And overall, Somm Olympics was pretty straightforward. I think the really difficult thing with ASI was to be able, they have a completely different format for service. And so the mechanics are different, which was actually great because I learned a whole new way of thinking about service by doing that, as opposed to just doing the CMS exams. Like you're actually tasting the wine before serving it to the guest from the decanter and things like that. But everything was pretty much straightforward at the best of the Americas competition and the best of the world competition. They have some much more difficult service scenarios where, you'll approach a table and the wine isn't chilled yet. You should offer cocktails to start. And what you should do at the very beginning is check the mise en place and see, okay, I've got bitters, I've got cognac, and I have sugar and sparkling wine over here. Maybe I offer a champagne cocktail to start. And so you would approach the table already with that information in mind. And so to get full points, you would have such a great understanding of what your mise en place is and like what you can offer, that there wouldn't be, you get to the table or you don't check anything at first. You go to the table, they order sparkling wine. You go to the sparkling wine, it's not on ice. You go back to the table, you say, oh, sorry, the sparkling wine's not done yet. Can I bring you anything? Oh, how about a cocktail? Sure, let me go see what I have. It's like all those things you could have already known those with just checking your mise en place for 30 seconds at the beginning. Get full points, and I think it would be the same in service, like really understanding your list, understanding your offerings. You get to the table and 2 people already got the Rotgipfler. I stocked 2 cold ones just in case, there's a big table and they want to do 2. But I sold both of them. I sold one to Billy and I sold one to Brady. And then you get to the table, oh, we want the Rotgipfler. Okay, it's like, well, what can I do in the meantime? Kind of thing.
That makes a lot of sense. What exactly is mise en place?
Sounds just like your setup. So it means like everything in its place. So just knowing mise en place is basically like your setup. Like this is where your serviettes are, this is where your glasses are, this is what you can offer, this is what you have prepped, everything like that.
That makes sense. I had never heard that term before. Wow. So what was the scenario where you would be going to Worlds again? Who do we need to be rooting for?
Mark Gillidew. Yeah, Mark Gilladew's a master sommelier. He's at, I think, 11 Madison Park now. He's super talented and has actually been really inspiring for me. I've crossed paths with him twice now at the USA finals and at Olympics, and he's super supportive, and I really like that guy. So we need to root for Mark.
Nice. And that
Not for my
competition
sake, for his sake.
is at the end of February or in February?
Yep, end of February. February, I think the 15th, the 22nd in Sonoma.
Cool. We'll keep tabs on that. So before we wrap up here more, what are some things that you are either excited about or interested to see in the world of wine in 2025? It could be something that you want to drink more of, or even if you're burnt out from all your studying and you don't want to drink wine, what are you looking forward to this year?
I think this year, I just really want to see more people drinking wine. It's just sad. Every day there's a new article that comes out. It's, San Francisco red wine sales are down 20% year over year. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, but I would like to see that trend changing. And so I think what I'm most excited for is, I think the world, like beverage on the floor of restaurants, I think our community is realizing something's up. And I'm looking forward to everybody looking inward and coming together and saying, okay, where are we going wrong here? Like, why aren't people drinking wine? And part of it is political, like the World Health Organization saying that no alcohol is good for you is certainly damaging, things like that. And I think I'm excited for, it feels very much like we're hitting the bottom of beverage sales in restaurants. And I'm excited for the community response to that.
Do you think, I just had a comment about that because Billy and I were talking about it recently on a podcast, but when articles come out about, oh, no one's drinking wine, I know that they're pulling sales numbers and stuff, but do you feel like that's a little bit generational and we're just maybe at the crossover between one generation and another in terms of their preferences right now? Or what do you read into it?
It's hard to say because I think that it's hard to say because where we are in Savannah right now, our wine program is actually up year over year. And I think that we could have seen this happening. Like I remember there was an article a couple years ago that was like the $20 glass of Cabernet Sauvignon is dead or something. And that's like, it's not good for the consumer. Like we're not offering value in a lot of ways. Maybe the answer is that you can't pour Napa Cab by the glass anymore. It's just not possible if you want people to continue to drink wine in restaurants and not at the average restaurant, at like the Fitzroy, then maybe Napa Cab is just not allowed. Or maybe you just have to dig really deep and find, those rare producers, and it just becomes more work, but good work on whoever's running the beverage program to taste and find, okay, here's a new producer in Napa that's, selling their wines at agreeable prices. Yeah. The truth is, I don't know. I don't know why people are drinking less. I don't know if it's necessarily a generational thing. I think it's more of just a market trend thing. And I think wine prices have gotten crazy. And I think that's been part of it. And so people just immediately write off wine because the last time they went to the restaurant, they spent $40 on 2 glasses of Napa Cab.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I guess one other quick question on that is, do you think part of your sales going up is just a relative lack of interesting wine lists throughout the rest of Savannah? Or I didn't do much research. I just have some anecdotal, I guess, testing where I was looking to eat. But do you think your program stands out, or do you think Savannah is actually pretty good in the terms of the Southeast in terms of their wine selection in different restaurants?
I think for us, part of it is location, like downtown. For a casual like gastropub restaurant, we're really the only one that has a extensive wine list in our comp set. So for us, if there's somebody who's staying downtown who wants to go out to dinner and not break the bank at one of the fine dining places, then we offer something really special. for them. And so I think that's been part of it for us. But there's lots of good wine lists in Savannah, but not all within our comp set.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. I had seen some that were a little further away, but you described my situation exactly. You were within walking distance of where we were. We switched from someplace we had to drive to that had a list. That makes a lot of sense. Great. I think that's everything. I'm really excited that we were able to have you on to hear a little bit more about everything. Yeah. Thanks again for joining. And Brady, is there anything else you want to add? Or are you good to go?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. We'll talk about Savannah offline here.
Yeah. That sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tony. Talk soon.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. That was our interview with Tony Gullikson. I hope everybody learned a little bit about wine culture in Savannah, Georgia, as well as wine competitions. And as we mentioned earlier, if you're interested in any of the wines that we mentioned, maybe some of the famous red blends at the beginning, the Bartolo Mascarellos of the world, go to the Vint Marketplace. We can find them all there and many vintages of them to boot. All right. And that is our episode for this week. We'll be back with another episode next week. Cheers.